There's not much to say about this dresser except that I got it from Salvage Center and I meant to keep it for our house. And I did, but it wasn't refinished. Because I'm that type of person, I refinish furniture and sell it to other people, but I never have time to do it for myself. Which is actually wrong, and I'm working on it, but I keep doing it still. It had been sitting in our living room in the other place for about a year and a half, and then we moved to the new house and the dresser moved to the garage. I thought it wasn't fair for it to just sit in the garage, so yeah, hi everybody, welcome to another makeover. If you look at this dresser from a distance, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. But you already saw that humongous chip on one side, the top has multiple scratches and dents, the finish on the drawer front started cracking, and here's the other side, not too bad except for those chips down there. And the legs were missing. I pulled the drawers out and started working with the top first. And no, I didn't clean the whole piece because I wiped the dust before I even started filming, and I was going to remove an old finish, so it didn't make any sense to me. But I was not going to do it by sanding the piece, and this is important. If you are going to sand the piece, you have to clean it first, because there could be something on the surface that could get stuck in your sandpaper and it can cause troubles. As always, I tried scraping first. Didn't work, so I switched to stripping. I'm using my favorite stripper, circa 1850. There are two versions of this stripper, liquid formula and gel formula. I used to be a fan of gel formula, and then it just disappeared from the shelves in the Home Hardware. That's the store where you buy this stripper. They had only liquid formula for a while, and I remember when I bought my first can, it was so funny because it was the same consistency as the gel formula. I think they screwed up at the factory and put gel formula in the liquid formula can, because when I bought my next jar, it was liquid. So I've been using it for a while until recently I bought gel formula again for a different project, and now I can tell you that I'm a big fan of liquid formula. To me, it works way faster, and I use less stripper than I use with gel formula. And liquid formula about $12 cheaper than gel formula. The only thing is, gel is easier to use on the vertical surfaces, and with liquid you have to get used to it. Once I'm done stripping, I like to go over the surface with a steel wool and a little bit of the same stripper. It helps me to get rid of any residue of the old top coat, and it makes my sanding job a little bit easier. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough and you don't have any scratches on the surface, you can just get rid of the old finish and that's it. You don't have to sand because the surface has been sanded before us. Just keep in mind that a little bit of the old finish still stays in the wood grain. So if you, for example, have 9 drawers and you have a scratch on one of the drawer fronts, you would have to sand all of 9 drawers, because otherwise, once you apply the finish, you'll see a little bit difference in the color. So yeah, that tricks with no sanding works only if your piece of furniture is in pretty good shape. Honestly, I have never been that lucky. I always have something at least on 1 or 2 drawer fronts. One more thing I like about liquid formula, that I can use my wire brush without clogging it up for some hard reachable areas like the frame, the edges of the frame. So with the liquid formula, I can put the brush in the container with the stripper and it dissolves whatever was on the brush immediately, like almost immediately. I can have a clean brush in 10 seconds. But with the gel formula, it doesn't work like this. It's always a little bit of a mess. I know it's possible to clean the brush in the methyl hydrate, but with the stripper, it happens like way faster. I stripped the sides of the dresser as well and moved on to the drawers. With the drawer fronts, I only need one application of the stripper because the finish is usually way thinner than on the top. Once the finish is stripped off, I go again with a steel wool, but this time I use methyl hydrate because, like I said, the top coat was pretty thin and I don't need to use stripper. And this is one of the examples I was talking about. I had all 8 drawers in perfect shape. Like this one, it was nice and smooth and I wouldn't have to sand it, but I had one drawer with a big scratch. There was no way to remove those handles, so I had to work around them somehow. I decided to apply the stripper to the handle first and do whatever I can do around it. I took my wire brush And this is aluminum wire brush, not a steel one. Originally it was a brass wire brush. It's supposed to be a brass, but that what happens when you buy brushes from dollar store. It looked like a brass, but strippers stripped the paint or brass, whatever was on the wires, and now it's aluminum. But still, it doesn't scratch the wood, it doesn't scratch the veneer, so I don't really care what's it made out of as soon as it works. Then I stripped the top coat of the drawer front and again took steel wool and methyl hydrate to get rid of any residue and clean the surface. And I repeated the same steps for the other 7 drawers. Once I was done with stripping, I flipped the body of the dresser on its side and made some type of mold around that chipped area, that humongous chip. Then I mixed the epoxy glue with some sawdust and wood chips. Here I'm using epoxy glue from dollar store. It works for me if I buy it from the same dollar store because once I changed and the epoxy glue was a little bit different and it was yellow. This one is crystal clear. I love it and I use it in all my repairs now. I like using epoxy mixture over Bondo because adding sawdust and wood chips makes this mixture stainable. This time I had to mix a lot of epoxy. I didn't have enough in my first batch, so I mixed the other one and I just put it over the first one. I didn't wait for a long time for it to dry because this is a fast drying epoxy. It's supposed to harden in 5 minutes. It doesn't happen that fast if you use a lot of it and if you mix it with something, but still it hardens pretty fast. I also applied the same epoxy to the small chips on the right edge of this side. While the epoxy was hardening, I moved on to sanding. And this time I hand sanded all the drawers. Yes, that's right, I didn't use a sander. Because I did pretty good stripping job, I didn't have to go lower than 180 grit sandpaper. On 6 out of 9 drawers, I had those handles and there would be kind of awkward to try to use orbital sander around them and I was risking to sand through the veneer. So I hand sanded with 180, including that drawer I had a scratch on. It turned out that that scratch wasn't that deep and I was able to sand it off with 180. And don't worry, my sander wasn't forgotten. I used it to sand the sides of the drawer fronts. Next, I hand sanded all drawer fronts with 220 grit. I could have just stopped with 180, but I was going to use Otis oil, and with Otis oil, the higher you go with the grit of sandpaper, the more sheen you get. If I only sanded with 180, I would have a matte finish, and I wanted it to be more on the satin side. I didn't mention it before, but someone already tried to do some repairs to this dresser using the hot glue. Like here, someone tried to glue the trim to the frame of the dresser. I don't actually know how it looked originally. I think those 2 boards were glued together, so I decided to screw them together. I just clamped those 2 boards together, and that wooden block you see down there, I put it there that the boards were leveled because this top trim, it was a little bit lower than the frame. And then I screwed the holes and put some screws in there. And I found this lovely repair. This is the board where you screw the legs in, and this board and the other on the other side, they both mostly holding the whole dresser. It looks a little bit terrible, but it's not that bad actually, and I can fix this board and reuse it on this dresser. Someone would probably say, why bother? It's easier to build a new board. And that's probably right, but not for me, because the only part I enjoy building is the legs. I don't like building wooden guys or any other parts of the furniture. That's why I don't build furniture from scratches. I refinish the existing one. And I always try to fix whatever I can, and if I can't, then I replace it with a new. In this case, I just needed a little bit of wood glue and some time. While my first repair was drying, I sanded the bottom of the dresser, just for the aesthetic sakes. I'm not gonna lie, I don't do it all the time, but in this case, the dresser was there on its side, it was in front of my face, so I just did it. By that time, my epoxy had hardened, and look at this. This is one good looking repair, but someone put too much epoxy. Here I took 120 grit, first of all because of the epoxy, I needed to sand it down, and I had some deep scratches on the side I wanted to get rid of. And while I was sanding, my camera was slowly moving, so here is the result. This side is done, it looks pretty good, and it's time to fix the other side. Next, I went for almost 2 hours of sanding. First, I sanded the top and the other side of the dresser with 120 grit sandpaper. There were little chips on the other side. At the edge, I filled them up with wood filler off camera. I had a lot of scratches on the top, and I used my iron and damp cloths to try to steam them out. And it worked pretty good. Wood is the fiber, and the fiber is sensitive to water. When you spray water over your scratch or you put damp cloth over it, the fiber absorbs water and makes it swollen a little bit. Let's say if you spray the wood with some water and let it dry, it's gonna raise the wood grain anyways, but it might not go as deep as your scratch is. With the iron, first of all, we let the steam expand and go deeper into the wood grain, and we speed up the drying process. Don't be disappointed if steaming didn't work, because sometimes we can have a deep scratch that goes through the veneer and it breaks the veneer. Steaming can just make it less visible, but you can't get rid of it. After steaming, I left my top to dry, and meanwhile I sanded the frame. It took me longer than usual because I did lots of hand sanding. I sanded the whole top with 180 and with my orbital sander. Then I hand sanded the whole top with 180 again to get rid of any swirl marks. And by swirl marks, I mean those hardly visible swirl marks, not like you can see them even from the moon. And then I took 220 and did the same steps with hand sanding again with the top and with the sides. And when I was happy and satisfied with my sanding job, I moved on to staining. I only needed to stain the frame because it was made out of different type of wood. I mixed together cement wood stain in 2 different colors, amaretto and American walnut. And then I started blending in my repairs on the sides. I'm sorry, I thought I was filming, but in my gloves I didn't press the record button hard enough, and I noticed that when this first patch was already painted. And this is a new product I was talking in my previous video. I was testing it on 2 different pieces, and it seems like it works pretty good. This is gouache paint. It's something from my childhood because back in the days in Belarus, we never had acrylic paint or any other type of paint except watercolors and gouache. And gouache was our like to-go paint. It's a water-based paint, but it's thicker than watercolors and it's not transparent, but it's not as chemical as acrylic paint. Back then, I was told that it was safe for the kids because you can even eat this paint. I mean, not intentionally, but if you have some paint by accident, nothing is going to happen to you. I'm not sure about now, and I don't know how they make this paint now, so I would recommend you to eat it, but for blending job, it works perfectly. I would recommend you to seal this paint with a thin coat of shellac if you are going to apply a water-based top coat, because this paint is water-based as well, and water-based top coat can dissolve it a little bit, so to be safe, it's better to seal. In my case, I was going to apply Otis oil, so I didn't seal it with shellac because shellac would give me a little bit of sheen, which I didn't want to. And I was testing this paint, so I left it as is. Like I said, I picked Otis oil as a top coat, and this time it's a super duper Otis oil. I ordered by accident instead of universal Otis oil, but honestly, I like it way better than universal. Maybe the coverage is not as good as universal oil, but I found that it's easier to apply for me. I don't have to work that hard. The only downfall, I had to apply 2 coats of this oil versus universal oil. I usually apply 1 coat. The application of Otis oil is pretty easy. You have to apply as little as possible, then buff it into the wood grain using white or gray non-abrasive pad, and after 1 hour you have to buff it off. Before applying Otis oil to the body of the dresser, I needed to address a couple of little dents on the top. For that, I'm using wax sticks, and I have them in a fruit wood, walnut, and maple colors. Walnut is way too dark, and fruit wood is a little bit on the reddish side. So I usually melt fruit wood, add a little bit of walnut and a little bit of maple, and mix them together, and this way I get the color I needed. And then I take a little bit of that wax I just mixed, and I put it into the dents, and I melt it in there. And once it's dry, I use 220 grit sandpaper to sand it and blend it in. And now we're ready to apply Otis oil to the body of the dresser, but this time I'm going to use my orbital sander to apply the oil instead of doing it with my hands. I take a piece of white non-abrasive pad and I attach it to my sander, and then I apply some oil on the surface or to the pad, it doesn't really matter, and just let the sander do its job. On the large surfaces, it's way easier and it saves tons of time. The sides I usually do with the sander too, but this time I had some repairs with my gouache paint, so I did it by hand. In the area where I had my gouache paint, I tried to be as careful as possible, but with the oil it wasn't really matter because the paint dried pretty hard and I couldn't take it off with this non-abrasive pad. And once I applied the oil, my repairs became pretty much invisible. So I can definitely recommend using gouache paint for repairs, but like I said, it's better to seal it with shellac just to be safe. The only thing, once the oil had hardened, I had a little bit of sheen in that area, but it wasn't because of the gouache, but because of the epoxy. Epoxy absorbed the oil a little bit different. So I think next time, if I am going to use Otis oil over repairs like this again, I will put one coat of shellac over the epoxy and then I apply my gouache paint. After 1 hour, I came back to my dresser and I buffed the oil off. It's very important not to leave any residue of the oil on the surface if you want to have a smooth and nice finish. And you would have not to just wipe off the excess, you need to buff it off. The legs for this dresser I ordered from Amazon. I had ordered those legs once before and I had hard time sanding the original finish. But with this set, sanding wasn't a problem. The original finish was coming off pretty easily. I don't know what happened with the previous set, probably it was just there something random. I started with 120 and then moved on to 180. And once I was done with sanding, I stained the legs with the same mixture of the water-based wood stain, amaretto and American walnut. The only downfall for these legs, they come with a mounting plate, which is good, but they have really short bolts and they only fit those mounting plates. I try to screw them out a little bit so I can fit them in my existing holes with the T-nuts, but I almost messed up the thread, so I decided to keep it as is and use the mounting plates. That white area is where my stripper was dripping and splashing. I cleaned those splashes with some methyl hydrate, but it still looks white. It happened because there was some shellac applied to the jars inside, and this is the reaction. So to address that, I'm going to reapply a little bit of shellac to that area. Even with one coat of Otis oil, the surface looks so nice and it feels nice and smooth. But they recommend to apply 2 coats of this super duper oil, so let's do that. I applied it to the top and the sides, and the drawer fronts I did off camera. I left it sit for about 1 hour and then I came back and buffed it off. And we're pretty much done here, except I have to leave Otis oil to dry for 24 hours. But other than that, it's done. A quick reminder how this dresser looked when I started working on it. And I had filmed a lot of videos of the final result, but nobody knows where they are, neither me nor my camera. So here's the only photos I have. And the funny story is one person came to me to see the other dresser I posted a couple videos ago. All her furniture in her house is walnut, so she wanted to add one more dresser to it. And when she came to me, she realized the dresser was not going to match the color of the other furniture because I stained it. And once I posted this dresser, almost immediately she contacted me and she said, "I'm taking this, please hold it for me." So yeah, she's a super nice lady and I'm glad that I made her happy. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and see you in my next video.